Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Avodah Zarah daf samach tes Avodah Zarah 69. Today's daf is dedicated for a shmir for the chayalim, that's all for the shvuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. Today's daf Gemara is discussing a mouse that fell into a barrel of beer. That Rav says that even though the mouse gives up taste and it's a bad taste, still from the fact that this is a chiddush of the Torah about the mouse being prohibited to eat and its taste being prohibited, we say even though it's nosin tam of gam, Rav says in this case it's going to be prohibited. But the Gemara says leis hilchos kavase, but we say. Gemara says on the bottom of Samachas and the base 68b 2 lines from the bottom that the law is not like Rav. So the Gemara says Yibalu. Now we have another question. Nafal will go chala. Let's say the mouse or the rodent or whatever it is, it fell into vinegar. Nafal go chala, fell into vinegar. So what will be the halacha there? And Rashi explains that the bayi is his question. Do we say that since the vinegar is so strong, therefore the sheretz, Rashi says, or on Samachas on the base, maybe it's a squirrel, that this, since the vinegar tastes so strong, that the mouse's taste is not ruining it, and so therefore it's going to be prohibited now. So nafal will go chalamai. So what would be the halacha? So Amar Rav Hillel Rav Ashi, Avi Ubda Be Rav Kahana also Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana said it's prohibited. So Amar he says, yeah, but that's not the reason, because no sin tam of gam by the case of a rodent is prohibited. It's not because the taste is prohibited, even though it's a bad taste, but there that basically the rodent was disintegrating into small pieces. And Rashi says, many try to struggle to understand this Rashi, but Rashi says, and since a sheretz is prohibited, and it when it gives off tumah, it's in the size of a lentil, so we have to be concerned also by achila, also by eating, if it's a very small size, that maybe he ate a small piece of it in the vinegar. So we're not worried about the taste here, we're worried about the mamashos, the actual mouse or rat that he's eating. Ravina Savar Mashiure B'Meir. Ravina thought that maybe we would say that the rodent is nullified 1 in 100. Mashiure B'Meir v'Chad. Amar Logar Mitruma. Maybe it's no worse than Truma. The Tanan Truma Oa B'Chad B'Echa B'Meir. The Truma is nullified in 1 in 100. So I'm really Rav Tchifa Bar Gizel Ravina Dilma Kitavun Shal Truma B'Kderidami Dilo Batil Tamayo. He says maybe it's like spices. When spices, the taste is never nullified, maybe even greater than 100. Meaning the spice is there for a very small amount, so it's never nullified because its taste is in a minuscule amount. Rav Acha Shir B'Chala B'Chamishin. Rav Acha said that when it's in vinegar, it's nullified in 1 in 50, even in a smaller amount. Rashi says, keeping the chometz tamo kasha, since the vinegar is very strong, well, buy shisan levatule. You don't need 60 times the amount to nullify it. Even if it's only 50 times the amount, it'll nullify it. And Rav Shmuel B'Rei the Rav Ika Shir B'Shichra B'Shisin. He said when it comes to beer, it's 1 in 60th. And the halacha is whether it's beer or whether it's vinegar, beer or vinegar, it's 1 in 60th. All prohibitions of the Torah is 1/60th. Rashi here gives us a psak, unusual with Rashi because this is a kitchen questions. Rashi wants to tell us the halacha here. So he says, all prohibitions of the Torah are b'shishim, and then he says, "V'chein halacha ravachas b'Yisrael." This is a widespread law amongst Israel. The min b'she'eno mino b'shishim chutz michametz. That when it's min b'she'eno mino, when it's 2 different items, it's going to be 1 in 60, with the exception of chametz. With the exception of chametz, which we'll see In the moment, Rashi is not nullified. But if they're the same items, min b'mino, it's mashu. It's even any amount by chametz. Kirav. V'tayim mishum nekol yisur Shabbat Torah min b'mino b'mashu b'rav. And in general, min b'mino, we're going to be strict. U'b'chametz k'dera she'eno mino atu mino. And by chametz, then we make a decree even where it's not min, not the same item, atu mino. And so therefore, by chametz, it's always going to be mashu. And by min she'eno mino, it's going to be shishim, Rashi says. But min b'mino, here Rashi seems to suggest that it is a mashu, but elsewhere Rashi says it's not like that. And Tosos says min b'mino is also shishim. That's a Tosos paskin. Anyway, so we go on to the next Mishnah. Now let's say the idolater is transferring the wine from one place to another. He's transferring the barrels of wine from one place to another. If it was under the presumptive status, and we're worried that the idolater is going to stick his hand in and do a agitation, a shilchshach, thereby prohibited because of idolatry. So if the wine was assumption that it was watched, then we're going to say mutter, it's going to be permitted. If the wine was under the assumption that it was watched, then we're going to say it's permitted, because we assume that the idolater, Rashi explains that even though the Jew might have gone far away, if he doesn't tell the idolater where he's going, it's permitted, because the idolater be afraid as long as the Jew has not arrived there. So he might think that the Jew is going to come at any second. So but if he tells him that I'm going far away, and then we say that if it's long enough, kadesha yistom the yigo, and enough for him to make a hole in it, and thereby make a hole in the barrel, and then go back and close up the hole and dry it up, then it'll be prohibited. Rashbag is more lenient. He says, if it's not enough to just make a hole, it's only prohibited if it's enough to, he has to have the time to open the whole top of the barrel and then reseal it afterwards. But Rashbag is not worried about just poking a hole in the bottom, because that would be recognizable. So where does the word shetume? It comes from Parsha of Bilam, where it says sisuma ayin. That's what shetuma ayin. That's what Rashi says. So it's shetuma. So an open eye, to make a hole. Okay, so second case of the Mishnah is hameniach yeno b'karo. And let's say you put the wine in a carriage or besfina or a ship, v'ocho b'kapandria, and he went there on a shortcut. Nechnas l'medina u'merchatz. So the Jew went in the shortcut around there. So if he goes into a city and bathe, mutter, it'll still be permitted, because since the idolater doesn't know when he's coming, he'll be afraid to touch. But let's say he tells them, listen, I'm going to do all these things, and he has time to make a hole, it's going to be prohibited. Rashbag says again the same answer. He has to have the time to open the barrel. The third case is, let's say he leaves the idolater in the store with his wine. Even though the Jew went out and then went back in, it's permitted. But if you let him know what he's doing, then it's a time it takes to poke a hole. Let's say he's eating with him on the table. He puts jugs on the table. Vilugin ala dovaki. And then he also puts the jugs in the cabinets, v'nicho, and then he leaves him. And then he leaves him. That which is on the table is prohibited because the idolater will say, listen, this Jew, he invited me to eat. So therefore, he doesn't care if I touch it. But what's in the cabinets, the idolater knows is off limits. But if he tells him to prepare the wine for him, then even what's in the cabinets is prohibited. And then the Mishnah ends with just like a general rule. If it's an open barrel, it's prohibited in the house. But if it's a closed barrel, it's permitted. Again, you have to wait the length of time, only if you haven't exceeded that length of time. To open the barrel, close it, and open the barrel from the top. And we assume that the Stam Mishnah here is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. That's what Rashi is telling us. So what does it mean that it's the assumption that it is being guarded? Let's say his donkey drivers and his workers are carrying items that are being prepared in a state of ritual purity. I feel hiflig man Yoser mill, even if he's farther away than a mill, which is 3/4 of a mile, tarosav tahoros, then we're going to say it's that the tarosav are tahar. But if he says, you go and I'm going to follow after you, since he's no longer in their eyesight, tarosav tameos, then it's tameh. So the Gemara is asking the question, Ma'ishna Reisha Umaishna Seifa. Why in the first clause where he's carrying the tahoros do we say it's still tahar? And in the next clause, since he's out of their eyesight, but he was also out of their eyesight in the first case, do we say it's tameos? Maishna Reisha Umaishna Seifa. So the Gemara explains, Amar Rav Yitzchak Reisha b'metayar chamarav u'po'al v'kach. No, the first clause says Rav Yitzchak is where the donkey drivers say, put them in the mikvah. He put the donkey drivers and the workers in the mikvah. And so therefore, even though they're touching it, it's tahor. Well, if that's the case, yachi seif anami. Well, if that's the case, the second case of the brisa, they should all be tahor. Why do we say it's tamei in the second case? The Gemara explains, because since he's not there, they're not going to stop their friends because they're amaratzim. They're not going to stop their friends from coming over and touching it and making it tamei. So even though they're not tamei, their friends will make it tamei. Well, if that's the case, why don't we say this case in the first clause where that there's the concern that they allow their friends to touch it. So Rava says on top of Samach Testament base, no, because they know that the owner is coming from the side, so they don't know when he's going to come back, and they're afraid. Well, if that's the case, also in the latter case, why don't we say that that's the scenario that the owner is coming from the side, and they should be afraid to allow their friends to touch it? The Gemara says, but since he says, you go ahead and I'm going to come after you, I'll catch up to you. So therefore, they had confidence that he's not there at that moment. Yeah, in all these cases, we have to use our common sense to determine if they would be afraid that someone would come and touch it. So remember, we had these 4 cases in the Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to ask, what's the distinction between all these cases? That there's a dispute between the Rabbanan, say it's a time to poke a hole in the barrel, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, no, it's a problem if there's enough time to remove the top of the barrel and reseal it. So the Gemara says, why do we need all these cases? Because if the Tana I just said this case, the first case where the idolater is bringing along the jugs of wine. This savar dama asi v'chazi, and then we're going to say that they adapt their scenarios in that case because the idolater is worried that they may come and see it. Aval b'karon b'tzfina, but in the case of the carriage or the wagon, ema, I might say the maflagol finasa, that the ship is going to go very far away. Ba'avin my debai, and the idolater is going to do whatever he wants because he's not going to be afraid. And if we just had the case of the carriage or the wagon, well, so maybe he'll come upon me from the other direction. I'll be afraid. But kaya guda and stand on the banks and he'll see me. But if it's the idolater in his shop, maybe I'll close up the gate. The other called the buy, and I'll do whatever I want. So so therefore we need all of these cases. Says the Gemara, this dispute in our Mishnah, where the Rabbanan say it's a time to poke a hole in it. Rashbag with Maureen says the time to replace the top of the barrel. That dispute is built shel sid. It's where there's a cover of plaster. There, that's where the Rabbanan are worried he's going to open it, because since it's white, he's not going to be able to tell the difference between an old one and a new one. Aval b'shaltit, but if it's clay, which is dark at the outset, and even though it's dry, it takes a day or two to whiten. Everybody says we're not concerned with a shetuma. We're not concerned about a hole because they're going to be it's going to be very clear if they made a hole. It's only prohibited, like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, until you remove the barrel, the top of the barrel. So if it is clay, everybody would be lenient like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So Meisvei, so the Gemara challenges this position of Rabbi Yochanan from the following brayso. I'm Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, v'alo stumo niker be'milamata. If you make a hole in it, it's recognizable whether you do it above or whether you do it below. Rashi says, "V'alostumo nikar." If you made a hole in it, it's recognizable whether it's above, whether the cover above is new and the hole, or whether the hole is new and the cover is old, or whether when the Jew opens the top of the barrel, he'll see underneath it this opening that was closed up. Because if it was above, the idolater would be able to smell it or see it, but he wouldn't be able to do that if it was below. But once he opened it up, it would be recognizable. So we challenge Rabbi Yochanan from this price. Now, yeah, because if you want to say the dispute is by clay, that's why you can recognize the hole. But if you say the dispute is by plaster, which is what Rabbi Yochanan said, I understand how everybody would know. But if it was below, I understand that you can recognize it. But if it's on top, it wouldn't be recognizable because basically you can replaster the whole top of the barrel. So Gemara says that Rabbi Shimon this price. Is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. He doesn't know what exactly the Rabbanan said. This is what he said. So if you say that your law, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel doesn't know what the Rabbanan are saying. This is what he says. So if you said your halacha, that the amount is to make a hole, if you said it by clay, shitimo, nikar, then it will be recognizable whether it's on top or below. And if you said it's by plaster, they wouldn't recognize it on the outside, but they would recognize it once they opened it up and they would see the hole. Rabbanan since he doesn't see the hole, the Rabbanan would say since he doesn't see the hole on the top, he's not going to notice it. He will notice it when he removes the barrel. He's not going to be focused on it. Inami is in the home. Sometimes the hole will get filled up and it won't be recognizable. The law is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel that it's only the time it takes to leave to open up the whole barrel, and not just a small hole. Hole Tanan stomach kavase, because at the end of the Mishnah it is anonymous like him. And also we have this at the end of our Mishnah, because it says, as it says, if he's eating with him on the table, and he puts on the table some jugs, and also in the cabinet some jugs, and he leaves them and he goes out, that which is on the table is prohibited, and that which is on the dolvaki in the cabinets is permitted. So if he says mix it together, then also that which is in the cabinet is prohibited because he told the goy to go there, so clearly he doesn't care. That's what the goy is going to think. And if it's open barrels, they're prohibited. If it's open barrels are prohibited, closed barrels are permitted. And how much time is it going to be prohibited? If he leaves there, the amount of time it takes to uncover the barrel. So pshita, so it's obvious that the Tana is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. That's exactly what Tana said. No, Rabbi Shimon Kotanila. You might have said that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is also saying that last clause of the mission. It's not an anonymous mission. So we say, no, it's an anonymous mission. It's not Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. The Rabbi Elazar, the Chayshlo is the Yufa. Inna my time almost finim chamra biyado. So the more sensible, if we rule like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, that we're lenient, that they're not going to make a hole, they're only going to remove the top and then reseal it. But we also combine this with another halacha that Rabbi Elazar said that we don't have to be worried about forgery of the idolaters because they're not going to forge it for such a small amount. That's the case. We should be able to leave our wine amongst the idolaters. No, the reason why we don't is mishum shaika, because we're worried about these small holes in the barrels that where the smell of the wine comes out from, and we're worried that it'll make a little small hole there and come to taste the wine. Okay, Rashi says. We're not worried about making a hole. Because it's no hard. Mishum de minker, because it's recognizable. And the Chayash Rabbi Shimon, and even according to Rabbi Shimon, we don't hold like him. The Zaifa, the Tircha, because that's a forgery, and that's a Tircha. Vanan Kabainan. Bein mamidin halacha k'Rabbi Elazar the lo chayesh l'zifta the chosem echad. So ha'ina ma'lo most finan chavios to most b'yanav d'cham. So if that's the case, since we don't rule like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, we rule like Rabbi Eliezer that we're worried about a forgery, that we're not worried about a forgery. Why can't we leave it? So he says mishum shaika, that there is a very very small pinhole. Shuba mekufas chaves lios reich hayayin yotzei. Yesh lachos shema yiktach shema miktas v'yitom edayayin. We're worried to make the little air holes slightly bigger and come to taste in the wine, and so therefore we're not going to allow it. Amarava Zona Ovedes Kochavim v'Yisrael Mesumin Etzlo. Let's say you have idolater who's a harlot, and she's sitting next to a Jew. Chama Shari, the wine will be permitted because we're going to assume she's not that. Why is the wine permitted? Because we're going to assume that the Jew is watching her, that she doesn't touch the wine. And we don't say that since he's not careful about idolatry, about harlotry, also he's not going to be careful about Yayin Nesach. Why need it? Takafu Yitzhar Davera, even though he has the overwhelming Yitzhar to do a sin, Yitzhar the Yayin Nesach Takafu. He's not going to be overwhelmed by the sin of Yayin Nesach. But on the other flip side, Zona Yisraelis, let's say you have a Jewish woman who's a harlot, Rahman al and an idolater, Misubin, and the idolater is eating with her, Chamra Aser, the wine will be prohibited. Her wine will be prohibited. My time. Oh, Vizila Alayu, Basrayu Garira. Since she does not, she is not respected. She is Ziwa. They treat her with disrespect. So therefore, she's going to be dragged after them. She's going to allow them to do a nisuch on the wine, even though she has no yetzer for this. Okay, so this is today's daf, and we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem.